Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here talking about the new balancing act of risk and growth. Because as we think about a topic like customer data privacy, it truly is a balancing act. It's a balancing act because on the one hand, we are managing risk around how we protect data and how we think about protecting the consumers with which we have a trusted relationship. And on the other hand, we have this powerful opportunity to build data-driven marketing strategies and grow deep relationships with the consumers on the other side of the experiences that we create. And that is what drives growth in our businesses. So as we jump into the conversation, we're going to start by talking about the tipping point that we are at this particular moment. The tipping point, first of all, starts externally, and these four forces that sit outside our organizations, far beyond our control, that are really driving us to think so differently about the customer data that we hold in our control and things that are far beyond what we are directly influencing. The first external force that we are facing is technological shifts. The technology companies that are in the ecosystem are making choices that change the rules of the game, what we can and cannot do with data, the value that we can extract from it, how we can operate in the marketplace. All of these things are changing and obviously impact the way we think about customer data. That's the first of these things that creates a tipping point in the external forces around customer data. The second one is government regulation. And so, of course, we are all deeply familiar with GDPR. We are familiar with CCPA. And while things have been perhaps a little bit sleepy on the regulatory front at a moment post-COVID or during COVID, we're, of course, on the cusp of what is likely to be quite a bit of regulation, whether it's pending regulation in Oklahoma or Illinois or Virginia. There's a host of states that are contemplating a variety of things, and certainly there's quite a bit of conversation at the federal level as well that leads us to certainly be very cognizant of the regulatory environment. And clearly that is an external environment that causes us to think about forces beyond our control. The third one is cyber threats. And so when we think about cyber threats, generally, it is not an if, it is a when that we have to have in our mindset. And that is an unfortunate reality that we all face. And we have to have that level of preparedness in our mindset. And then the fourth thing that is beyond our control is consumer behavior. What are their preferences? What is the mindset that we have to have as we think about stewarding customer data with responsibility? What are the preferences? What are the behaviors? What are the tendencies that are really controlling their mindset? And I will tell you that in our recent EY privacy study, what was really striking was that after the pandemic, 58% of consumers were actually more aware of sharing personal data than before the pandemic. But not all of it is actually bad news. 65% were actually more willing to share personal data if it was to improve their health. And 54%, for example, in a completely different category, were actually willing to share personal data if that was to receive coupons or discounts. So you can see in a very personal health context or in a very commercial context, there is a willingness to share personal data. So those attitudes are not always necessarily a willingness or a controversy around sharing that data, but it's about the value exchange. It's about the transparency and the trust with which we do that. As we move to the internal forces that really cause us to also face a tipping point, let's think about some of the other things that are at play. First, when we look inside our companies, we are contemplating a number of other fundamental changes. Number one, when we look inside our companies, there's a need to better connect the silos across the customer journey. The customer doesn't care about the organizational chart of our teams. They don't care whether marketing or customer service or sales sit in different parts of the organization. They simply want a frictionless, seamless, connected experience. And so it's incumbent upon all of us within our organizations to connect those silos in the customer journey. The second imperative that many of us face within our organizations is, of course, the imperative to better balance brand and performance marketing to scale. And of course, that may be a false dichotomy in and of itself, brand versus performance marketing, because of course, top and funnel metrics work in tandem to drive outcomes. And I think perhaps we have created this false dichotomy where it's a versus when it really should be a full continuum where brand marketing, of course, drives performance and performance drives brand. But of course, this is something that so many companies are fundamentally struggling to think about the right continuum to create in their organizations to better tie those objectives together and be sure that they are accomplishing their objectives. The third force within our companies, or the third trend certainly that we are seeing, is that CRM, or customer relationship management, and media buying and strategy are being more closely tied together than ever before. So we're seeing a lot of shifts in the operating model as data-driven strategies, data-driven marketing, and again, that continuum of the customer journey continues to come closer together than ever before. And so as CRM and media come closer together in the organization, in the operating model, that again creates a tipping point. The fourth shift that we're seeing inside of companies is the changing value of customer data and how we think about return on investment. This isn't simply about a short-term view on thinking about return on investment where we think through the lens of a campaign and perhaps return on ad spend, but really more of that shift to a lifetime value and a relationship lens. And then last, the critical importance of modernizing the data foundation across our companies so that we can harness the power of data across our organizations. Most companies are fundamentally looking at how they organize data because it's not a shortage of data that they face, but the opportunity to harness the power of customer data across the organization, whether it's psychographic, attitudinal, behavioral, transactional data. How do we take the power of all of that data to make it actionable so that we can truly drive the outcomes that we all seek to drive growth? So as we contemplate those tipping points, both the external forces and the internal forces within our organizations, we certainly recognize that customer data privacy sits at the core of the issues that we face. And we have to really steward the responsibility in our organizations with tremendous, tremendous seriousness. There's a value exchange between a consumer and a company, and we have to create that positive human interaction. It starts with a foundation of transparency, being sure that we communicate clearly. We have to do that with authenticity. We have to breed trust. And when we do that, we can create loyalty and create that repeat interaction, that repeatable, loyal return on investment between the company and the consumer that causes them to believe that we steward the relationship with a sense of responsibility that shows that we respect the end user that's on the other side of that relationship. And fundamentally, that sits at the heart of this conversation about consumer data privacy. So as we look at these issues, what we'll talk about is the notion of three forces that really sit in fine balance. And we could focus solely on the yellow circle that sits in the heart of this, this visual here on the screen, which is we could just focus on risk and compliance. We could simply talk about how we make sure that we steward the responsibility and make sure that we aren't breaching any of the regulatory parameters. That's simply an ante to be in the game. But what we also need to do is make sure that we balance that with the opportunity to grow. We want to take the opportunity to reinforce trust by stewarding the serious responsibility to manage the agenda around data security and the opportunity to use data ethically. We also want to make sure that we're taking great care to optimize outcomes, because when we have consumer data, it gives us the opportunity to drive more effective marketing. It also gives us the opportunity to personalize the customer journey, to make it more frictionless, to make it more relevant to the consumer. And then finally, if we do a particularly good job with our approach to consumer data and privacy, we have the opportunity to differentiate our brand, to differentiate our company's stance in the marketplace, to create consumer-enabled privacy controls that truly go back to those values I was talking about around transparency, trust, authenticity. And if we do that, can we perhaps even rise to the level where we can brand and communicate those values in the marketplace to differentiate competitively? That is the question. So as we go through that construct, we'll start with the first one, which is the notion of reinforcing trust. And I would argue that trust is the ante simply to be in the game. We do not have the option of not complying with the law. And so the first things we have to do are think about obviously analyzing the current regulatory compliance, whether it's GDPR or CCPA or any of the frameworks that certainly follow. We have to implement secure privacy controls and practices throughout the entire data lifecycle so that we are complying with those regulations. And we want to make sure that we are evaluating risk of all the different activities around how we use data in the organization. From a data security standpoint, we need to evaluate data access rights across the entire organization. All the people that are touching the data, we have to really think about that from a people, process, and system standpoint. And we want to map all of those current processes across the organization so we're making sure that we're not just looking at how things work today, but continuously looking for those opportunities to improve. And we want to benchmark our capabilities relative to the industry standards so that we're making sure that we're continuously rising to new levels. And then last but not least, there's a new series of words that I think are going to come into the equation here, which are really about ethical data usage. You know, we talk about data now in the context of human rights. It's a conversation around making sure that we are using data in a context for which it's intended. Did we collect more than we needed to? Did we use it for its intended purpose? These are the kinds of conversations that we're going to have. But that's just the ante to be in the game. Then we move beyond that. We start to think about the entire customer journey, from acquisition to engagement to conversion to retention to loyalty. What gets the right people to us? What lets us engage them? What drives that trial or first purchase? How do we keep people with us and reduce churn? And what gets them to spend more, spend again, and evangelize? These are reasonably simple questions, but of course the levers that we have and the opportunities we have to drive effective change in any one of those questions is now driven by the power of data and technology in tandem. Now, we're not going to explore every one of those use cases. Not every one of them is equally valuable in our business case as we look at how to deploy data and technology to drive our marketing effectiveness or to drive our customer journey or orchestrate a stronger story across it. But what we want to do is selectively deploy it so that we can better tie marketing, sales, e-commerce, customer experience, customer care to something that's coherent, connected, intelligent, and over time, likely orchestrated with more machine learning and artificial intelligence than ever before. So that is the opportunity, not just to steward the risk side of the equation, but to steward the growth opportunity side of the equation. And then when we think about the third pillar of the story here, it's around differentiating through privacy. Think about it. Today, we scroll through 2-point font, lots of text on any given page. We have no idea what we're signing 9 times out of 10. And we simply say, I agree. Our consumers don't know what they're signing up for. So if we go back to the values at the beginning and we hold ourselves to that bar of transparency, authenticity, trust, and loyalty, I think we have to ask ourselves, if we think about the interfaces that exist in the world, whether it's for shopping or dating or ordering dinner or anything else that exists in the consumer landscape, have we created that kind of easy interface for privacy? Have we allowed the consumer to make conscious, differentiated, transparent, dynamic choices about what data they do or do not choose to share with us? And if we do, what opportunity would that afford us in terms of the relationship it would create? It's a question we can ask ourselves. And if we do it well and we create that interface, what opportunity would that afford us to perhaps differentiate our brand, perhaps give us a competitive edge in terms of how we create a new level of trust with consumers? I'll ask you that question, and hopefully some of you will be provoked by that particular challenge. So as we think about what this all means to the human experience, data enables the human experience to be more deeply connected. There's so many dimensions of what we can potentially unlock in terms of a human connection to the people who are on the other side of all the experiences that we create. We can create deeper community. We can create better physical, digital, and hybrid experiences from a commercial retail experience. We can create better loyalty programs. We can give people the content that they want and the form factors they want. The human expectation is going to only rise. The bar will continue to get higher. And so if we're going to use data more effectively, we must steward it cautiously, carefully, with responsibility. And if we do, we can actually rise to the new standard that people will expect of us. They will expect it to be more personalized, more relevant, more seamless, more anticipatory. Of course, we can't step over the line where it is too anticipatory or too personalized, but when it is appropriate, when it is right, it will give them the level of service that they will expect of us as brands, as companies who understand who they are as a persona in the geographies that they live and with the products and services that they consume from us. And it is at that moment that we can really serve them best. So as we contemplate the value of customer data, we have to think about building a business case that contemplates innovation, whether we're thinking about dynamic ad insertion on the one level, or we're thinking about artificial intelligence or IoT at the other end of the spectrum. We have to shift from having that conversation between perhaps a CMO, a CIO, and a CFO around simply no-name use cases at one end of the spectrum and perhaps that return on ad spend or a campaign-based metric on the left, and really focus on that lifetime value equation that really sits on the right, which is really about insights, an integrated customer experience, the opportunity to generate insights that drive product innovation across the entire product portfolio. It's really at that right side of the spectrum that we unlock the value of an entire company, and data enables us to do it because it connects the entire network of assets across a company. So as I close out my remarks, I will simply leave with the following 8 points, because there's no question that as we look at many of these internal and external forces that continue to change the landscape, we are certainly faced with cookies going away in January 2022, and we are facing a new playbook about how we grow and steward the value of our companies. So the playbook may contain some moves that are both big and small as we face the future. I'll leave you with the thought that certainly it is not optional. We must follow the privacy regulations. Number two, it's incumbent on every company that I meet with. Certainly we're focused on the opportunity to accelerate first-party data capture. And really, we want to focus on accelerating that first-party data strategy and capturing those durable IDs. We're moving towards a world where we're operating in a single domain from a technology standpoint, developing second-party partnerships so that we can enhance the value of that first-party data. We're using more contextual targeting and publisher targeting, obviously, as we head towards the future. There's an imperative to modernize the data foundation so that we can really use the data in its distributed form wherever it sits in the organization. So whether it's data fabrics or mesh or any other concept that we can draw value from, the concept is let's use the data in a more modern form factor than where we sit today. And then certainly let's contemplate this opportunity to enable better experiences for consumer control so we can rise to this higher bar of empowering consumers to make conscious choices as we move forward. Thank you very much.